book discussion, Hernan Diaz Trust. The book is a novel about a family between the 1920s and the 1930s that is very successful on Wall Street. So we're talking about Wall Street magnates here. We're talking about wizards of Wall Street, money, big money. The book has several themes. I would say the three big ones for me are, number one, only the winners write the history. So it shows in a very subtle way how people with power, or the winners of a certain game, be it a war or be it the competition on Wall Street, doesn't matter. The winners write the history. It also shows, I think, in a sort of embellished way, a Wall Street wizardry, and that's something that I'm personally not a big fan of, because having been within the system of Wall Street and still sort of functioning within the outskirts of the system, if you want, I just feel like this whole embellishment and Hollywoodization of Wall Street always kind of shoots the wrong way. And I want to talk about this a little bit, because that's also definitely part of the mission of this podcast, to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So I think it's not good to have these stereotypes in your head. And I think third, I think just simple conclusion of the book is that it really doesn't matter if you're a woman, a man, old, young, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's about the ability of people to do things, and some people are more successful than others, and that's it. There's no such thing as, well, powerful man, born into a powerful family is more skilled at doing things than somebody else. It just I don't know if Hernan wanted to show this in this particular context, but this is definitely one of the takeaways I have. This is Not Even on Podcast. It's September 3rd, 2022. This is Krim Delco. It's a Saturday. There's no update for the year. We're down 33.5%. The market is down by 17.3%. We're underperforming by 15.2%. Hernan Diaz Trust, it's a good book. It's actually a very good book. I really enjoyed the book. It's an interesting novel. It's challenging in a sense that it shows deep human psychology as it is surrounded by money and Wall Street in the 1920s and 30s. So the context matters. This is not a Russian novel with Russian nobility in the 19th century, nor is it a contemporary novel with, I don't know, people in Hollywood or something like that. This is the 1920s, 1930s Wall Street. I think Wall Street has had a very big, it played a very big role in those times. And I think kudos to Hernan Diaz, because I've seen interviews with him where he says that he doesn't really understand finance that well. But the one thing he absolutely understands extremely well is the role of the Federal Reserve, and that the Federal Reserve is at the core of pretty much any big financial problem that is created in this country, not because they're evil people or anything like that. It's just because the concentrated power of the Federal Reserve when it comes to finance is such that the functionaries within the Federal Reserve just often don't have the right answers to the problems, and then create even more problems. To me, that's a very big takeaway from this book. It's almost a side note, and I think most readers might not even notice this, because if you're not embedded in the financial markets, if you're not really understanding what the financial markets are all about, then you might have this embellished view of the Federal Reserve as this all-encompassing body of functionaries that do the right thing to help the economy. Well, I hate to break it, but that's not the case. I think the way I see the Federal Reserve, it is this institution that was implemented in 1913 with certain goals in mind, and it's like any other big federal institution, has grown through mission creep, not just, by the way, through the Federal Reserve, but also people, let's say in Congress and other politicians, have taken advantage of the Federal Reserve and morphed it into something that it should not be, which is an all-powerful financial markets setter. It's not just, this is the problem with the Fed. It's not just an arbiter. It's not just a regulatory body or something like that. The Fed actually has the power to influence outcomes. The Fed has literally the power to influence financial market returns. And that's not a good thing. That is not a good thing. The markets should be left to their own devices, because that is the best way for price finding, price mechanisms, and for the adjustment of relative prices. I had in my episode yesterday, I spoke about the student loan crisis and the problem there. And this is just one example of when you have the federal government involved in setting prices of loans, for example. The results are that you will have too much loans for not enough return. And then you have this problem that we have the student loan crisis. And we can extrapolate that to almost any other asset class where the Fed and the government is involved. And unfortunately, the financial markets are a very big asset class, and they have enormous amounts of clout over our economy. So this whole relationship between the Fed and financial markets is distorted. It's bad, and I think Hernan has caught that really well. So this is definitely an interesting point. By the way, just for new listeners, why am I talking about a book here? Why am I discussing books in this particular podcast series, the Not Even Wrong podcast? Well, the idea is the following. The Not Even Wrong podcast has a mission, and that is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. Now, reading books, I've said this many times on this podcast, reading books is not just a pastime of hedge fund managers. It's not just something that I would suggest we do as some sort of, a hobby or something. No. Reading books is actually the business of hedge fund managers, because we are in the knowledge business, and we have to bend our mind. We have to do yoga for our mind. We have to condition our mind, and reading books is conditioning of the mind. This is why we discuss books. We also discuss books because we like to have a record of what we read and how we thought about this. But the main reason for you guys out there is, listen, take this seriously. Start reading books. And by the way, it doesn't have to be novels. This is now a novel about Wall Street, so don't think that you should be reading novels about Wall Street. I've discussed in this series. This podcast has been around for 3 years, and we've discussed many different types of books: fiction, nonfiction, Russian philosophy, books about Irish girls, teenage girls, contemporary teenage girls, whatever you want, like all kinds of stuff. Some of the big ones like Zauberberg, the Magic Mountain, or similar type of books, heavy duty literature, all kinds of stuff. I think reading is conditioning of the mind, and the same way conditioning works in actual sports. Not everybody should condition their bodies the same way, and this is the same with books and the mind. Everybody has different minds are plastic. You can evolve into something by reading X and then evolve into something else by reading Y, and I very strongly believe in that. So having said that, now let's talk a little bit about the takeaways. Like I said, there's the three big things that I want to talk about. Number one, the winners write the history. I think in this book, very particular, though I don't want to give away the plot, of course, but you definitely get the sense that people have the people who win in certain battles. In this case, there's no war. Not in the book. There is a war going on, World War II, while the book is running, or in the time of the book. But this is not part of the story by no means. The story is really about powerful people that have the ability to write their own stories and bend reality, or at least think they can do that. And I think that's important. I think if we look at the narrative today, if you look at the narrative, let's say, within the context of financial markets, we, for example, at Orange Capital Partners have been very highly involved with, let's say, electrification of transportation and the implementation of AI in transportation. And I believe we are on the winning streak of this whole battle. And now we're also able to write the story. And this is a very good example of the winners writing the story, and also having the power and the ability to bend reality. And I think this is an interesting thing. Let's say if you analyze industries today and you look back at the history of, let's say you look at the history of the internet, and then you're trying to learn from the history of the internet for today. So, why did Amazon win? Well, Amazon was doing this and that. Let's say one of the big winning decisions of Amazon was to use distributed computing within their own systems, and then AWS grew out of that. So something like that. And you can now say, well, where are we today? And why isn't this applying for today? Well, the reason it's not applying is because history literally doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes. And the reason it rhymes and doesn't repeat itself is because the circumstances are different, and the winners could be different. The winner, winning a game, the winner Like Amazon didn't win because they have AWS. Amazon didn't even win because they have Jeff Bezos. Amazon won because the relationship between Jeff Bezos and his employees and his competitors at that time, in that context, was the right one. So there's a lot of these factors. And my point here is that you really can't reason by analogy. And you can't reason also by looking at the past and then just using the narrative, because the narrative is influenced by the winners. And you don't know who the other potential winners could have been. But today, in the context of competition, there are, by definition, competition means other people could win, and you don't know who the winners will be. So you can't really just apply the winner strategy of 20 years ago to today, or the winner strategy of 100 years ago to today. That's my point. It's very dangerous. And the conclusion, of course, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So really, please, you have to go through the trouble of internalizing the narrative of today and finding your own way to apply strategy against that narrative. You can't just reason by analogy. I guess this would be my biggest takeaway from that. I think the second point I want to discuss about this book, in the context of the book, it is this glorification of Wall Street. And unfortunately, every time Wall Street comes up in Hollywood or in novels, it's always the same problem. There is no such thing as the wizard who turns the wheels of Wall Street. In this case, it's a little bit more convoluted. The guy who's so powerful and all that is maybe not the kind of guy who actually is the all-encompassing superpower. But still, you have that feeling that Hernan is trying to convey, that idea that some people actually, just by being smarter, are able to make money. And I don't think that's how it works. I think I've said many times, the way I see Wall Street is a lot more like a SWAT team or Navy SEALs team. It's a lot about perseverance, training, and the ability to be ready when it's time to be ready. So the genius that sits and thinks and then comes up with ideas, that's part of it, but you have to have that grit to be constantly ready to shoot. And unfortunately, you don't get that many opportunities to shoot. That's the key. I've spoken about this in many other contexts, but again, I just want to question this grandification, this aggrandizing of the Wall Street narrative as some sort of, well, the smart people, they can make money and the others don't, or something like that. That's definitely not how we see it. I think the third here is sort of, the third point is the I guess the best way to formulate this without giving away anything of the plot is that it's often not the way you think it is. What you see is not what you think it is. The underlying structure of relationships, contexts, narratives, it's almost always different than what you think it is. And just be aware of that. I don't have some actionable advice against that. And again, let's not forget, this is just a book discussion here. So it's not my job now in this particular episode to give you some actionable advice or anything like that. All I'm trying to say is the following. I'm trying to say that when you look at, let's say, companies like Uber, Tesla, Amazon, whatever it is, just be aware of the fact that what you see is most likely not what you think is really going on. Excuse me, what you think, what you see and what you think is going on is not what actually is going on. I think this would be very helpful advice for anybody to at least know what not to do. I think this Hernan gives us a very nice novelistic, dramatic version of this particular topic. So to summarize, Hernan Diaz Trust, it's a great book, highly recommended. It's about Wall Street in the 1920s and 30s. It's about people writing history the way they want it, and often also you can write the same thing in different contexts and then it comes out very differently. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, actually, that I want to sort of overarch over the takeaways. I think, like I said, the Wall Street narrative is very often about this wizard who makes all the money and stuff, and I would say that that is questionable. And I don't agree with that, and I also don't agree with Hernan Diaz's portrayal of Wall Street wizardry in this particular context. But I think that's not such a big deal. The much more valuable thing that this book gives you is the fact that the winners write the history, and the winners are able to bend reality to their liking. And I think for us hedge fund managers, what's important is that we're here today and we're listening and reading and creating narratives. And those narratives are very often written by the winners. And we just have to be very careful about that. Because when we're today, we obviously don't know who the winners will be. And therefore, what we hear in terms of narratives from the past might not apply for the future. But nevertheless, it's important to read, it's important to follow those narratives. It's just even more important to dissect them and find the relationships that are useful for you in your wealth generation endeavor. Thank you.